I want to welcome everyone here this evening. But tonight what we're going to do is we're going to piggyback a little bit off of the lesson that we had this morning. And what we're going to talk about this evening is this idea of there were those who loved God. And ultimately what we're going to try to identify this evening is, where do we set among these others who we will bring up as examples this evening who really did show that they loved God? And what was the pattern that we could kind of take away from that? Because it is important to us. And, today in life as we know it, love, that word, can get so watered down. And, it's one of those things that when you do say, I love you with all of my heart, it should really mean something very special. And sometimes it does, and sometimes people just have these things roll off their tongue. I love this, I love that, I love everything about everything, and before you know it, it's kind of where they really like it. Not that they really love it, they kind of like it. And it's okay, to like a lot of things, and it's okay to love quite a bit, but especially when it comes to the Heavenly Father, there's a certain way that He expects things, such as worship. There's a special way He expects to be worshiped, and he lays it out in the Holy Scriptures. It's not hard to understand what He is looking for. Sometimes it might be a little more difficult to present it that way to Him, as is with love. He tells us what it takes to show our love to Him. He definitely expresses His love to us in a very special, unique way. More in a way than we have no idea of people here on earth. They can't show it the same way as God does. We try and do our best, but God is the ever-giving. He's the ever-loving. He's the ever-knowing. He's the great physician. He's the one that we can find refuge and peace and sovereignty and just everything you want, joy and comfort. It's all there. And He's always available, never too busy. We can call upon Him any time of the day, the night, anytime. So this evening we're going to start by turning our Bibles to the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 10. And here we're going to read a number of verses to kind of give us a foundation for our lesson this evening. So that would be Deuteronomy chapter 10. And I'll begin in verse 12 is where I'll begin the reading. Deuteronomy chapter 10, beginning at verse 12. And it reads, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways, and to love Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and His statutes, which I command you today for your good. Indeed, heaven and the highest heavens belong to the Lord your God, also the earth with all that's in it. The Lord delighted only in your fathers to love them, and He chose their descendants after them, you above all people as it is this day. Therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve Him, and to Him you shall hold fast and take oaths in His name. He is your praise, and He is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven in multitude. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God and keep His charge, His statutes, his judgments and his commandments always. Those are the words that were spoken to the people. Now, we know that prior to this, the people had struggled quite a bit with the love of God. They as documented for us in the previous chapters of this book, they had real problems. When God brought them out of captivity, they right away started to think, well, he just brought us out here to let us die. We were better off back where we were, even though they're the ones who made the request. And God fulfilled their request. He had food delivered to them each and every day. He never allowed them to really have any. They had clothes that never wore out. But yet they struggled. And at every cause, they questioned the love of God. Moses talks about when he was up in the mountain, in just the previous chapter to this. He was up in the mountain, and he said, and God wanted to just do away with everyone. And yet he listened to me and allowed me to come down and see what we could do here. But God was furious with you. I'm up there getting the words of the Lord to come down to deliver to you, and you're down here with a golden calf. They struggled. And so at this point, here we see it as it's coming along here, we're being told how to love God. This is what God expects from you. This is what God expects from his people. And then he says in 11, the second verse of chapter 11, know today that I do not talk with your children. What he's saying here is, all right, now this lesson is not for your kids. I'm talking directly to you. And you are the ones who say you love God. And that's why I believe that this is a good lesson for us, as those who love God, to be able to listen to what is being said. It's not for the children, it's not for the descendants, it's for us, the ones who love God. And so I think this is a bit of information for us to kind of look at. There are those who love God, and here's some examples of those who love God. Moses, we just looked at that. We just kind of saw what was going on there. And then you've got Abel as an example in Genesis chapter 4. And we can read this very quickly. It's just a few verses. Genesis chapter 4, beginning at verse 1, it says, Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering unto the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, and of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel and his offering. But he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Now we know what happened after that. God tried to talk to Cain. He tried to find out. He tried to console with him. But Cain turned on his brother and killed his brother. But we see Abel is here in a situation where Abel is talked about in Hebrews chapter 11. The very chapter we talked so much about this morning. And he's in there as an example that will live forever, as it is written, of one who loved God and did what God asked of him. And then you've got Noah. And Noah, you could turn if you want to Genesis chapter 6, beginning at verse 1. But here really what you're going to read is that in this point in time, God looked down upon the people and saw that all of mankind was evil. And all of their thoughts were evil. And so God was going to do away with the entire mankind, but yet there was one. There was one who God was pleased with. And that was Noah. Can you imagine that? Out of all of humankind, one was seen as good in God's eyes. That would be someone who loved God. So we can learn some things from his examples. And Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, that is the event, that is the documentation of he was ordered, he was commanded to take his son and to sacrifice him. And what do you think he did? He headed that way to do that very thing. And at the very last moment, another offering was put in his place. But Hebrews chapter 11 tells us that Abraham was okay with this because he knew that God had the power to bring him back. And Abraham's life, as he lived it, was pleasing to God and shows us a great example of how to love God. And then, of course, Peter, John, Stephen, Paul, the list could go on and on of great examples of those who loved God. But from any of those, we can take away some things that will help us to first identify, whether we really love God or not. I know I say I do, but sometimes when I read certain things, I say, well, maybe I don't to the extent I need to. And maybe you feel that way sometimes too. So it's important for us to understand what it is that God actually wants from us. And then we deliver upon that as is needed. So those who love God, we should understand how their love was demonstrated. And this is one of the things we first need to understand. And the thing that we can see right away is they're all in. They were all in. Their whole life was to please God. In everything they did, it was to please God. Here in Deuteronomy chapter 10, at verse 12, it said, "Now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all of your soul." So they had to be all in with their heart and their soul. They had to be all in. In Matthew chapter 22, at verse 37, Jesus speaks to this same thing. And in Matthew chapter 22, at verse 37, it is recorded, Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." So now we see it's with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then we can move over into Mark chapter 12. At verse 30. And here we see a very close rendition to this. Jesus is speaking. He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." This is the first commandment. So now strength is added to this list. And then in Luke chapter 10 and verse 27, we see it exactly as it was there in Mark. So we see that you've got to love God. We have to show our love to God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. That's why I say they were all in. There's nothing left when you give all that. God should be the highest priority, the one that you're engaged with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. So I think it's important that we begin to break this down, because to love the Lord implies absolute reasoned devotion and faithfulness to the one acknowledged to be the supreme master and divine being. This is not just a fond emotional feeling or an affectionate friendliness. That's not the relationship we have with God. That's a relationship we can have with one another. That's a relationship we can have with siblings. That's what we can have with parents. That's what we can have with friends. We can have that relationship with whoever we want. We can have that relationship with a pet. But that's not the relationship that God is looking for. And that shouldn't be the relationship we're looking for to have with God. So here, we'll start with all their heart. Well, the heart is the center of the inner part of the individual. This is where it all kind of begins. The heart is the center. It relates to the depth of allegiance and devotion that's required. The heart is pumping the blood through your entire system. Without the heart, we got a problem. If our heart is not operating correctly, we have a problem. The proverb writer in Proverbs 4, verse 23, tells us that out of the heart proceeds all of the issues of life. So we understand that there is so much flowing out of our heart. You know it when you feel the emotion of your heart. There are times, and we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about prayer this morning. There are times when you have a love that you're pouring out so much that you feel it emotionally. And when you feel that, you think, wow, that's from the bottom of my heart. That's deep love. And that's right. And that's what God expects from us, that deep love. Not ever-changing love. Not that I love him today, but not tomorrow. I love him today, but, the last week has been a pretty tough week. I'm questioning this relationship. That's not the kind of love. That's not from our heart. When we take on a spouse, we recognize that's a love in the heart. And we will sometimes tell our spouses, I love you with all of my heart. I can remember the first time my wife made that comment to me. I love you with all my heart. And I told her, well, you can't. That's a very nice notion, but you can't. You got to give that to God. But she felt the love. And I've said it back to her. We know that there is a great bond there. And that's what we're looking for with God. That's what God intends from us, to have that great bond with all their soul. This tells that this is the person's life principle or breath of life. The soul represents one's true personhood, the inner, invisible self. It's different from the physical body. Our physical body can say one thing or another, but our soul is something that we don't reveal what's in our soul to people. That's deep in there. And that's the relationship with God. Let's love him with our soul. Every ounce of who we are. We should be living Christ-like. We call ourselves Christians. Christ-like should be our attitude. Christ-like should be our actions. Christ-like should be how we walk each day. People should understand, they should see that in us. If people aren't seeing that in us, then we're not walking properly. We should stand out. We should be different in a very good way. And we must love God with all of our heart and with all of our soul. And then we have this idea of the strength. And every ability of man and all his energy should stand behind his relationship with God. That's with all of our strength. You know when you've worked a good, hard physical day, how you feel. Wore out. If you're anything like me, you're wore out. Most times I ache too. But we should be giving God every ounce of what we have to give. There should be no question mark. Never should it be questioned, our love for God. And if we're doing it with all of our heart, all of our soul, and with all of our strength, then we're doing pretty well. And then comes this last bit about all of our mind. Understanding, intelligence, disposition, thoughts, imagination, a purpose and plan. Everything here is needed within the confines of our cognitive ability. And this is a lot. When you put all this together, think about what we're talking about here. You can see now why there are so many who start the race and then bow out of the race somewhere along the line. But not for those who love God. For those who truly love God, they're in the race from now till the end. Because it's not work anymore. It has become a way of life. And perhaps you found that in your life. I go back to the example of when I was studying to become a Christian. And I was a little later in life, quite a bit later in life, when you think about the kids today. And I probably waited longer than I should have had because I was trying to get everything perfect first. I thought that's what I was supposed to do. How wrong was I? But in the beginning it was, okay, these are laborious commands. These are hard to do. And as time continued to work, I found out that a lot of those in the beginning weren't so hard anymore because they have become a part of me. They became a part of my life. It was who I was and who I wanted to be. So it became easier and easier. But then I continued to study and found out, well, all right, now I got all of this I got to deal with. How can I ever get this all handled? And you work on it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and you keep working, striving forward, and before you know it, you're living a life that isn't so difficult when it comes to what God is asking. And as we read, God puts these commandments forth to us for our good. That's what we have to understand. When we understand that, all of a sudden, the table turns. The direction turns. The attitude changes. Because now you recognize that, hey, when I do these things, it's better for me. I no longer have to worry about the things I told that person might get crossed with the things I told this person, and I'm in trouble when those two talk. No longer did I have to worry about looking over my shoulder. No longer did I have to worry about all that heavy weight of sin. Things become so much clearer. And when you do stumble, when I do stumble, and when I do fall, I recognize it really quickly. And you can ask for forgiveness and get right back in the position where you want to be. This is the love that we have with God. But these are the things we have to accomplish to show our love and reciprocate it back to the Lord. So the elements of a person described by these four terms depicts the emotion, consciousness, drive, and intelligence, and the cognitive abilities of a person. That's really what we're looking at right here. It's all here in this slide. This is what's required. How hard or how easy is that? Well, we can continue on and get a little deeper in this. We can, as they say, peel that onion back a little bit further. Let's look a little bit deeper into this. Well, how did they do it? Well, these examples that we showed earlier, they did it by showing God respect. That's probably one of the first things that we have to establish, is a good respect for God. Acknowledge Him as God. They didn't try to put themselves above God. None of them did, and neither should we. God is the supreme being. God is our creator. We have no place above Him. We have no place to question His commandments. We're in no place to question when He asks us to do something, or gives us a command to do something, or gives us direction. Certainly there's going to be things harder for some, easier for others. There's going to be some that we wish we could take our Bible and just cut a few passages out of there. That would make things a whole lot easier, but we don't, we can't, we won't. Because God is the one true truth. That's it. We think about Abel with his sacrifice. He did it exactly the way God asked. That shows respect. And God appreciated that. And He let it be known that He appreciated that. Noah, while living righteous and preaching God, that was duly noted by God. He recognized that. It's written. He made sure it was documented and written for us. That was respect to God, what Noah was doing. Abraham, while he dwelt in a foreign country, in tents, he showed respect to God because that's what God asked him to do. He asked him to get up and to go. He had no idea where he was heading, but he did it. Faith, respect. That's how he did it. And Peter, when he confessed Jesus as the Son of God, that was a love for God. No question in his mind. They do what is asked. Noah, while building the ark to God's specifications. We read that and we say, wow, that's a lot. They rebuilt the ark. It took them hundreds of years to get that thing together and right. And it's somewhere where you can go and visit now. But God was very specific with the specifications of what was needed to carry Noah and his family. And He did it exact. He did exactly what was asked. Abraham, when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, not knowing where he was going, he did it. Pure respect. Stephen, when he obeyed and defended Jesus until death, he showed respect. He did what was asked. And Peter, when he left all to become a fisher of men. Now, I'm going to say Peter had the greatest of life prior to this, but he didn't have all the trouble that he was getting ready to be in for. But he did what was asked of him. And that shows their love for God. And the last point is they had great faith. They all had great faith. Turning back over to Hebrews 11, kind of where we started this morning. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4, it says, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks." Abel did everything that God asked of him. utilizes him to continue to speak to us of what it takes to love God. This is an example that God has carried forward for us to understand. Noah, in Hebrews 11 at verse 7, by faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Now, here was someone who listened to what was going to be said from God. God told him, he listened. Did he believe this was going to happen? It was going to be the great flood? They'd never seen anything like this before. But he trusted in God. He respected what God had to say, and he did exactly what God asked of him. And God has recorded that for us so that we know, and we can use this as an example of what it takes to show God our love. Abraham, just down the next verse, verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which would receive as an inheritance. He went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. And then down at verse 17, it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. God carried this through for us so that we can see what it takes to prove and show our love to God. And then faith, as it is noted, we must have faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, beginning at verse 1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are invisible. And in verse 6, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. How do you see yourself in comparison to those mentioned in this lesson? That's for you to decide. But these are folks who have proven a love for God. And if we want to say that we love God and we want to emulate this, that we are true followers and we love God, we want to be with him when our time expires here, then these are the things we must do. And we can do. We can do. And sometimes it's just a matter of us taking a moment to kind of reposition priorities. Reposition where we stand in our life. We get on track, and then sometimes things start coming up out of everywhere, this side, that side, inside, outside, and before you know it, we're way off track. And we wonder, how did we ever end up over here when I want to be over here? That's because rather than being proactive, we allow the days, events, to run our life. We become reactionary to those things. We just need to stay on top of it and continue forward, looking to our home in heaven where we want to be. These that we have described this evening were those who loved God. And for us, we would do well to heed to the words that God has delivered to us in the form of love. So tonight, if you're here with us, as you are, and you're struggling with some part of your life, And maybe some things we talked about this morning, maybe it's some things we discussed this evening. You know, all of us from time to time are going to have, you know, spots in our lives we wish we could take back, we could go back, we could, you know, change. Well, now's the time. Now's the time to do that. Before it gets everlastingly too late, before things have a time to change in a bad way, make corrections today. There's no better time than right now. God will never ask us to do anything that can't be done. And so when he tells us this is what it's going to take to show your love to me, he knows we can do it. He already knows we can do it. And maybe you already are. But for some of us, we still have work to do. And so if you're with me with that, then let's make those changes. If there's anything we can do, we want to assist you. Sometimes it's prayers. Sometimes it's just, you know, having an ear to listen. We're here. And if you're here tonight and you've not obeyed the gospel, you've not taken those initial steps in your life, the question would be, what's hindering you? Again, there's no better time than the time as we stand here right now to make that change in your life. No one knows what tomorrow may bring, but we certainly know that we have this moment right now. And so, whatever your need may be, please let us know how we can assist by coming to the front right now as we stand and sing the song that's been selected.